Leads us, ladies and gentlemen, to our first panel on aircraft carrier developments around the world. India, China, the United States, and the United Kingdom. And I'd like to turn the floor over to Rear-Admiral John Kelly, US Navy, retired, a man with enormous aircraft carrier experience, among other things, commanded the Abraham Lincoln Battle Group, and he will chair our first plenary session this morning. Admiral Kelly, please. Thank you.
Well, good morning. And if I could ask my panel members to come on up and take a seat while I give a few introductory remarks here. Dr. Cahoon, admirals, representatives of many navies and industry, thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to moderate a panel on aircraft carrier developments in a period when we are seeing more nations make the strategic and fiscal decision to invest in these enormously complex and expensive platforms, perhaps since prior to World War II. And there are a number of implications, and I hope we get into those implications as we move through the discussions by our panel members this morning. Let me briefly introduce these folks to you. The first is Dr. Erickson. Dr. Erickson is an associate professor in Strategic Research Department at the US Naval War College and is a core founding member of the War College's China Maritime Studies Institute. He received his PhD in International Relations and Comparative Politics from Princeton and has taught at the US Naval War College and Yonsei University. Rear-Admiral Cunningham will provide a United Kingdom carrier update to us. He's completed tours as an aviator with Sea King helicopters, Canberra bombers, I found rather interesting. And then extensive experience in the Lynx helicopters, operations officer on Brazen and illustrious during the Yugoslavian efforts in 1995, and commanded the destroyer Gloucester, the assault ship Fearless, and the UK carrier Strike Group. And then finally, we will finish up with Dr. Stan Weeks, who is the Senior Defense Scientist for SAIC Corporation, has extensive strategic and operational experience, 24 years in the United States Navy, commanded the flagship for our standing naval forces, NATO, has taught at the National War College, the US Naval War College, is a recognized expert for CBS News, and provided commentary during the Gulf War and most recently during the Iraqi freedom. So a distinguished panel. And so without further ado, let me please ask Dr. Erickson to come up and provide his overview.
Well, thank you very much, Admiral Kelly, for that kind introduction. And I owe special thanks to Dr. Boutillier, Brett Widoff, and the other conference organizers. It's both an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today to discuss what I think are some of the most interesting, exciting, and important developments in maritime affairs today, namely China's latest deck aviation developments. Before I begin, let me make the usual disclaimer that these are solely my personal views, and of course they in no way represent the policies or estimates of the US Navy or any other organization of the US government. But I think the timing of this could not be better, and I wonder if Dr. Boutillier may have known something that I did not in advance. Because as we all know now, China has an aircraft carrier no longer named Varyag, but now named Liaoning, after the province, Chinese province in which it was refitted. On 25 September, in a very important day in Chinese history, Liaoning was officially commissioned and delivered to China's Navy. And this made headlines around the world. The internet in China and around the world was abuzz with excitement. And I think in the Western press there was a bit of almost feverish coverage of this issue, but in some ways one could almost instead emphasize how long this was in coming. At the ceremony at the naval base in Dalian, presided over by China's top leaders, including President Hu Jintao, Premier Wen Jiabao, both visible here, also the commander of China's Navy, Admiral Wu Shengli, of course the governor of the Liaoning province, and many other notables. When I try to imagine what was going through their minds at this point in Chinese history, I think in some ways it must have been not so much how quickly that this had come, but how long it had been in coming. When we consider, for example, that China's naval commander at the time made the first proposal for an aircraft carrier in 1928, at the founding of the People's Republic in 1949, the commander of China's Navy at that point, as well as Premier Zhou Enlai, were supporters of deck aviation development. In 1958, Chairman Mao Zedong made a very powerful speech suggesting that China should develop railroads on the sea, as he called them, sea lane commerce with naval support. The fact that from 1982 to 1988, as he in effect fathered China's modern Navy, Admiral Liu Haqing made aircraft carrier development a priority. In many ways, when we think of what President Hu Jintao was thinking of on that historic day, it must have been the weightiness of the historical mission and how long it had taken his predecessors to bring this into being. There was a very large set of festivities after some confusing signals to the outside world with websites. Credit where credit was due. Thank you to the chief designer, a proud graduate of Shanghai Jiao Tong University, a sort of maritime MIT of China, if you will, and of course the two senior captains in charge of this carrier, the captain, senior captain Zhang Zheng, and the political commissar, senior captain Wei Wen. And a very solemn moment when senior captain Zhang receives the flag from the commander of the People's Liberation Army. This program is called the 0048 program by Chinese nomenclature. This means that it was approved by President Hu Jintao in his capacity as chairman of the Central Military Commission in August 2004. So his presiding over the commissioning was one of his last acts in office and represents one of his greatest symbolic contributions to People's Liberation Army development. But this has been a long road, even just from the perspective of this hull alone. Purchased in 1998 from the Ukraine, yet not even delivered to Dalian until 2002, and a lengthy refitting thereafter. It's worth noting by all Chinese accounts, and I think studies of China's very large shipbuilding industry bear this capability out. Well, the hull originally came from Ukraine. The internals are almost completely Chinese. So this is a Chinese engineering achievement of significance. Still very much a carrier in development. Some of the absolute capabilities are relatively modest, and as Chinese interlocutors constantly remind me and China's media and the media around the world, China for years has wanted to not be the last member of the United Nations Permanent Security Council members without a carrier and has finally achieved that wish. So the symbolic significance is tremendous, but the absolute capability and timeline should not be blown out of proportion here. Also, it should be noted that while there are many aircraft carriers around the world, Liaoning is properly characterized as a medium-sized carrier. As I have been reminded by a knowledgeable Chinese source, China will likely have larger carriers in the future, but for now, this is what China is starting out with in its deck aviation development quest. Now, of course, deck aviation requires aviation, and here I think the timing is good that China's aircraft industry is finally becoming far more capable than it was in previous years. The J-15 aircraft is under development as a likely initial Chinese carrier fighter. Of course, it's an interesting story in terms of development, clearly strongly emulating the Sukhoi 33 Flanker D in many respects, but as with other types of cutting-edge Chinese military aviation developments today, to say that it's a copy is not fair. I prefer the term emulation because, well, China has clearly drawn heavily on attributes of foreign designs. At the same time, it's made its own improvements and brought its own engineering to the table here. So this will be a particularly interesting area for us to watch. And as we look on the internet for photographs of things on the deck of Liaoning, we see a variety of apparent mock-ups and tantalizing photos, not conclusively identified, but of apparently further efforts and further indications of Chinese naval aviation development. So definitely watch this space. Now, I think, like everyone else in the room, I had great pleasure and excitement yesterday to have an opportunity to go aboard and enjoy some very high-speed maneuvering aboard the Canadian Navy's Hull 16. But it's interesting to note that Liaoning is the Chinese Navy's Hull 16. So if we had had an equivalent tour yesterday of Liaoning, I just wanted to show you a few things that we might have seen as we went around the ship. A variety of mess and recreation areas with some delicious types of food, hot water 24 hours a day, crew quarters of various types with all the details being thought of. As an aside, I should note, as I've studied Chinese deck aviation research over the years, I've seen just dozens and hundreds of articles examining every possible aspect of carrier operations. Certainly I see a lot of my own nation's carriers and their various attributes featuring prominently, and I must say it does seem to be a very thorough study and analysis that suggests a serious Chinese effort to learn how to develop and operate a carrier in all its manifestations. Certainly no easy task. And again, internet photos are suggesting that China is thinking very carefully how to master the complex system of systems of deck aviation operations and making adjustments along the way. Certainly, cats and traps will be one of the biggest types of challenges for China in years ahead in deck aviation. But we also see indications that such details as various indications for the various indicator markings for the aviators are being adjusted to make sure that they'll be visible in all types of weather conditions. Now this all brings us to some important questions, because I think the reason why Liaoning has attracted so much attention is the fact that an aircraft carrier is so symbolic in many ways of a nation's capabilities and intentions in the maritime sphere. Particularly a country such as China with such great potential and such tremendous aspirations, yet also so many things happening recently, so much uncertainty, so much still unknown to the outside world, and indeed in some ways probably to China's strategists and planners and leaders as they grapple with some of these new programs. So if we look at one of the most authoritative statements to date on the purpose of Liaoning from China's Ministry of National Defense, it lists a whole variety of missions for this carrier. I've highlighted two that I think are particularly significant that I'll return to in a few slides, because these are in some ways relatively new compared to previous Chinese efforts, namely defensive operations, perhaps in out-of-area, as well as cooperation and non-traditional security threats, where previously China didn't have the requisite platforms to maximize participation in those areas. Not surprisingly, this whole range of missions dovetails very nicely with the set of new historic missions that President Hu Jintao, in his capacity as commander of China's military and chairman of the Central Military Commission, assigned in 2004. No surprise there. Yes, sir. But I think what this really boils down to conceptualize is a near seas versus far seas set of operations for China. China's most important focus remains in the three near seas, the Yellow Sea, the East China Sea, and the South China Sea, where all of China's unresolved maritime and the vast majority of its territorial claims remain. The far seas further out into the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific are less important here. So if we look at potential near seas applications, we actually have some fairly strong statements from a variety of Chinese experts, many with naval affiliation, saying that the carrier will play some role in furthering China's interests there, presumably in a deterrent capacity. But I think this kind of rhetoric potentially causes a great deal of concern in the region, and it will be interesting to see how it evolves over time. Furthermore, the retired Chinese admiral who led Chinese forces in the 1988 skirmish with Vietnam, in an exclusive interview brought to my attention by my colleague, Professor Lyle Goldstein, has specifically stated that an aircraft carrier would make a tremendous difference in any future conflict or crisis with Vietnam. And I think this really catches the attention of the region. On the more positive side of the ledger, I think there's great potential for Liaoning and its successors to play a role in Chinese far seas operations, potentially in a very positive sum and public goods providing capacity. Perhaps some of the Chinese statements about blue water ambitions may be overly ambitious, at least at the moment, and I think China will be careful not to push too far in this direction, since it still has so many priorities in the near seas. However, there's definitely an interest in naval diplomacy in and beyond the region. Securing the many Chinese overseas and finding ways to protect them is clearly important. This is naturally something that China would want to do, and we can already see that in a very symbolic sense with the Libya evacuation operations. Humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. I've seen conflicting accounts as the extent to which China's Navy is fully interested in focusing on this, but I hope it's the case that this will be a wave of the future, and I think it could be a very positive one. Finally, a particular area to watch is long-distance protection operations for various types of Chinese vessels, and perhaps both military and civilian. And we've already seen an indication of this in China's very successful and positive contributions in its 12 task forces to the Gulf of Aden. This is definitely a long journey for China. The first step, I call it Liaoning, China's starter carrier. It's been referred to as a stepping stone by some. And there are many steps that China will have to go through to truly master carrier operations as its more experienced counterpart world navies understand this concept. But there's no question that China has taken an historic step forward, and it's noteworthy that Senior Captain Zhang Zheng, in a recent interview on CCTV, delivered in excellent English, I should add, acknowledged these realities and was clearly working very hard with his team to address them. And I think he clearly saw the historical responsibilities on his shoulders in that regard. So to conclude here, why does this matter? What implications should we draw at this early date? Well, China's carrier development is really a symbolic bellwether. And I think Major General Qian Lihua said it best. The question is not whether you have an aircraft carrier, but what you do with your aircraft carrier. What China decides to do with Liaoning and its future carriers will have critical implications for China's place in the world and for the maritime system. So thank you all very much. I'll be happy to discuss any further issues in the Q&A. And if you have any further interest in my research on this, please see my websites and their publications outside. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott.